Hi guys, I wanted to give you this short video because I heard about your trip to Araps and I had a chat to Tim and he told me of an incident on the Watchtower chimney that caused me a lot of concern. And so I wanted to put this video together to show you what happened and what might have happened and the dangers that were not evident, but if a fall had happened, it would have been a very, very, very serious fall. So as I understand it, on the Watchtower, and I've drawn it roughly to scale as best I can, and I sort of understand that the Chockstone is about as big as a small car, around that size. So to just excuse the scale and convert my drawing into what actually happened. So I'm doing this sort of third hand, as it were, so excuse any mistakes and apply the physics that I talk about to the situation. So Mark got himself up under the Chockstone and needed some assistance to get around, which is a pretty common thing for all of us when we need some help. And what proceeded to happen, I understand, is that he asked for a tight rope from Tim and then he yarded up hand over hand without letting Tim know that was happening. So as he climbed up like this and a loop of rope gathered underneath him. This is an incredibly dangerous thing and could have easily resulted in a fatality for Tim and may have, in an extreme situation, been a fatality, a fatality for Mark, I mean. And in an extreme situation, it's physically conceivable that Tim could have been, badly injured as well. So I'll go through the physics of what happened. So as Mark climbs up, this is, well, just before I rubbed it out, there is virtually no factor in a fall. The rope will take all of the fall and stretch. So it's virtually a factor fall of 0 because there's 4 meters of rope out and no slack. We're going to call this 4 meters because that's what Tim estimated and that's my estimation. So it's about 1, 2, 3 and about 4 to Mark's harness. So just alter that accordingly. But that's my assessment of the fall potential. So I'm just rounding the figures out so that the maths is nice and simple. So at this point, if Mark fell, it's almost a factor 0 fall. Perfectly safe. Tim's got a 3-way anchor, I understand, in this situation. He's tied into the anchor, but he's belaying off his harness. So he's somewhere between the harness and the edge, and I presume he was standing, but I don't know that. So as Mark climbs up, we'll get to the first meter. So his head is here and now it's here on the lip. The rope now has a meter of slack in it. I understand that Mark's arms are holding on about here. So at this point, the fall factor, I'm just going to put this across here, is 0.25. Now Mark climbs up another meter. I'm going to put that meter, so that's 1 meter there, 2 meters there. And the fall factor is now 0.5. So that is that there's 4 meters of rope out, but he's got a 2 meter possible fall. And then as he climbs up to here, right to this edge, we're now at 0.75. And when he's right at Tim, that's a 0.1. Now that's a terribly dangerous fall. in any circumstance. Most climbing falls will never be above 0.25. 0.5 would be a monster whipper, like absolutely mammoth on a lead climb. But the problem is that any fall above about, let's say, well, any fall above this point, the physics change dramatically, because this factor increasing, because this would be a factor 1 fall if Mark fell here, which would be unlikely, because that would be 4 meters of rope out and 4 meters of fall. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. So obviously not that likely, but still getting yourself in a situation where a factor 1 is possible is almost completely unacceptable. So the problem is this would be if the fall was theoretically a straight drop and clear at each of these points, and it's not because of the bulge of the rock. And I haven't represented it accurately here, but you get the idea that the rope is running over a couple of edges, probably at least 2 points, if not 3. And at each of these points, which I'll just mark another one there as a hypothetical, you'd have to see in reality, at each of those points, that reduces the length of rope out in terms of the physics. So the problem with a fall here, as you can see, it's a 3 meter fall, but with only 2 meters of rope out. So instantaneously, we're getting up into factor 2 territory. And here, this is an absolutely catastrophic fall right at this lip, because a factor 2 fall is almost guaranteed to break the belay loop. The belay loop is the weakest part of the harness and rope setup. The harness, rope, carabiner setup. So there's a carabiner and a belay device at Tim's waist, a rope, and the belay loop. The belay loop is the weakest point. The carabiner and the belay device are the middle point, and the rope is the strongest. And so Mark felt that he was climbing to safety, but he was actually climbing to danger. Now, I can't emphasize enough what a near miss this would be. You should never be climbing yourself towards a factor 1 fall, let alone a factor 2. And that would have resulted in Mark going to perhaps the belay where Dan was standing, but would have bounced to the bottom. And if it wasn't fatal, it would have been terribly catastrophic. And it's completely avoidable. So having a belay loop like that, having a loop in the rope, is an absolute no-no in a top rope setting. And I just want to emphasize again that as Mark thinks he's climbing to safety, he's climbing to danger. So if you're not sure about this, just Google factor fall ratio or fall factor ratio, and you'll see the physics involved in it. So how can we, that's the first danger. And the second danger is that I'm not sure whether Tim was standing or not. The second danger is that a fall would drag Tim to his knees, in this case, and may cause him to let go of the rope. And he may not be able to hold the rope because of the dynamic forces on the rope. A factor 1 or a factor 0.75 is very, very hard to hold. And if the heat builds up in half a second, Tim's instinct will be to let go. As you know, we just cannot help but let go in that sort of pain, because the rope would be burning through to his bone. And so this could be avoided by either Tim sitting down, which is not always comfortable, or Tim belaying off the anchor. This will be normally a reasonable setup for me. I would do that if I knew the climber, but you have to be aware of this risk of being pulled to the ground in the belay. So that's another thing that could have happened here. Not because of going on the tightrope here, but because of the dynamic forces generated from putting a loop. This belay was okay until Mark put a loop in the rope. So I'm not criticising Tim's belaying. Tim was doing the best with the information that he had, and I don't know what his stance was. So I want to just talk about how this could be avoided, or like what you could do to help someone in this situation. So we'll draw the rock again and the ledge, and then up to the cliff, and the three-way belay. Sorry, Mark, but it's my drawing, it's not you. We'll do Tim belaying off this point here, not on his harness, because he needs to, I think, in this case, be belaying on the power point. So Mark says, I can't get up, I need a tight rope. Completely acceptable situation. All of us have been in it. So Tim says, okay, and he ties the belay off. So we'll just, so all of this over here was danger. Tim ties the belay off, and then what he does is the rope that's coiled up on the ground at his feet, he grabs the bit that's on the top and he lowers a loop down like this, and it comes back up, and then he puts it through a carabiner and he lowers it back down again. Now the drawing is getting very unclear, but we'll do it this side. So there's a length of rope lowered down, and of course it'll loop back up, but there's a length here as well. And then what he does is he instructs Mark to put his foot in this loop and to pull on this. And so as Mark pulls, he stands up a little bit and stands in the loop, and Tim takes it in. He undoes the knot and he takes it in. And Mark continues. You can yard up on the rope, but you yard up and give yourself a leg up, and that means the rope at the waist is never going slack. And then you can get yarded up all the way. It might take a little bit of time, but at no time is either Tim or Mark in danger here. So this gets the big tick. So I hope that's clear. Everything about this is dangerous, and it is very possible that above here, any fall from here or here, it would have resulted in harness failure. That's guaranteed. I can guarantee that. And that it may have been fatal, or Mark would have been catastrophically injured. Now, you might be asking yourself, you might be a bit confused and wondering why, if Tim is belaying down here, and Dan has climbed up and is here, we'll say that there's no protection, so Dan is now above his pro. So the rope is going to his harness, and we'll put this protection point a bit lower. And we'll say Dan has just gone out 1 metre above the pro, but he's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 metres of rope is in the system. And so here we have 7 divided by 1, we have 7 divided by 1. And so you can see that, 1 divided by 7, sorry. So you can see that factor, that fall factor, just exponentially drops off. And if he was 10 metres of rope and 1 metre fall, it's a 0.1 factor fall. And it just gets exponentially smaller and smaller as he goes up. because he's going up and he's putting more rope in the system, so there's more stretch. But in this point, there was no points of belay. See here, each of these points minimises the factor, it reduces the fall factor. In here, there are none. And so the factor fall gets bigger and bigger as Mark gets up. But here, after this point, it becomes safer. After this point, it becomes safer. It becomes increasingly safer until the fall factor just diminishes to nothing. And anyone who's leading, what they'll do is they'll try and put a piece on the ground before they take off, so that they're only one body length off the ground. They pop the next one in, and that reduces the fall factor by a lot once you've got the two pieces in. So it's the length of rope out with no protection in it to the belay. And here, it's a length of rope out with protection to the first piece. So that's why this is very different to this. And it's counterintuitive that this is much more dangerous than this, but this is potentially fatal, and this is just a little fall on a nice sunny day. So I hope that's understandable, guys, and climb safe.